Welcome, dear listener. You've done enough for today. You've carried the weight of hours and thoughts, and you are safe now. Nothing is asked of you here, nothing but rest and the quiet comfort of story. Tonight, I'm going to tell you a love story buried beneath the brilliance of one man's name, the story of Albert Einstein and Mileva Marić. She was his first great love, his confidant, and the only one who understood the wild equations of his restless mind before the world ever called him a genius. Possibly better than him. But history has a quiet way of forgetting women who dared to stand as equals. Her brilliance was real, her sacrifices were deep, and for a moment in time, their minds and hearts moved as one. Before you settle in, be sure to like and subscribe to my channel and tell me where in the world you're listening from. The world feels a little smaller when we're all connected by love. Let us begin. It is the year 1896. The streets of Zurich stir with the restless energy of a new century approaching. Gas lamps flicker against stone walls. Carriages rattle over rain-darkened cobblestones, and within the towering grey walls of the Swiss Federal Polytechnic Institute, history waits, silently, for someone bold enough to change it. It is here, in this city of thinkers and dreamers, that a young woman dares to cross the threshold of Europe's most respected scientific school, a place where almost no woman had ever been welcomed. Not in the lecture halls, not in the laboratories, and certainly not among the future giants of theoretical physics. She walks alone, books pressed tightly to her chest, a faint limp in her step, the quiet reminder of a childhood injury she long ago learned to carry with dignity. She is Mileva Marić, a 21-year-old Serbian woman. Born in Titel, a small town in Serbia, under Austro-Hungarian rule, raised in a world where women are expected to marry, not to calculate, to serve, not to think. But Mileva has come here to prove otherwise. She takes her seat in the great lecture hall, the only woman in a sea of young men. Some glance toward her, curious, some whisper, amused or unsure, but she lowers her gaze to her notes, and the whispers fade. Among the students sits Albert Einstein, a 17-year-old with uncombed hair and a restless grin. A rebellious German Jew, already known for questioning every rule, every authority. He notices her, not because she is the only woman, but because she is the only one who isn't looking at him. Their worlds could not be more different. He, bold, irreverent, unafraid. She, disciplined and serious, carrying the quiet burden of being underestimated. And yet, by the time the term is over, it will not be the loudest voice in the room that will change Albert Einstein's life forever, but the quiet mind seated just a few rows away, the woman he would one day call my equal. The weeks turn to months, and little by little, the distance between them begins to close. It starts with shared glances over lecture notes, a brief exchange of ideas after class, discussions that begin in the bright halls of the Polytechnic and continue long after the lamps have burned low. They begin to walk the quiet streets of Zurich together, side by side beneath the falling snow, two brilliant minds, drawn not by romance at first, but by something far more scarce: intellectual recognition. Mileva, reserved but unshakably precise, and Albert, playful, untamed, daring to challenge every accepted idea. Where she brings discipline, he brings wild possibility. Where he dreams, she calculates. And somewhere between those walks and whispered debates, they discover what neither had ever known before, the joy of being truly understood. Albert speaks of light, of space, of time itself bending and stretching in ways no one dared to imagine. Mileva listens, sharp-eyed, steady, running the numbers in her head, challenging him, grounding him, pushing his wild theories towards something real. They become inseparable, the Serbian woman and the German rebel, both outcasts in their own ways, both defying the world that expected so little of them. But their growing closeness is not without consequence. The men in their class begin to notice. Their professors exchange glances. Albert's family, when they hear of her, are scandalized. A Serbian woman 4 years older, physically marked by her limp, not Jewish, not worthy. His mother, Pauline Einstein, calls her too serious, too old, too unsuitable, for a son destined for greatness. But Albert does not care. He only sees the mind that matches his own, the partner who meets him on equal ground. And as winter turns to spring, what began as curiosity deepens into something neither of them can fully name. Late at night, in the quiet corners of the library, the space between them begins to disappear. The air shifts between them slowly, not all at once. What began as study sessions and long walks home becomes something more, something unspoken but impossible to ignore. They start finding excuses to stay later, to meet earlier, to linger in one another's presence until the world around them fades. Mileva begins to appear in Albert's tiny rented room more and more often, not as a guest, but as part of his daily life. She watches him pacing, scribbling equations across the walls, filling pages with questions the rest of the world had not yet dared to ask. And when he falters, when the numbers refuse to behave, it is Mileva who leans over his shoulder, guiding his pencil back into order with the quiet precision only she possesses. Their minds remain the center of their bond, but their hearts and their bodies begin to follow. Long evenings turn to early mornings. Conversations stretch into soft laughter. Laughter gives way to touches, fleeting at first, then lingering longer than either of them had planned. One night, as snow drifts quietly against the windows, Albert pulls her into his arms without thinking. There are no speeches, no declarations, just the quiet inevitability of two people who have long since crossed the line in their hearts. They kiss, slowly at first, then with the urgency of everything they had kept hidden for far too long, and they do not stop. Days pass, their secret deepens, they become lovers in every sense. Mileva stays later, sleeps beside him, her presence filling every quiet corner of his life. From that night on, a quiet intimacy settles into Albert's small rented room. Mileva stays later, sometimes not leaving at all. They are lovers, in every sense, though no one has spoken it aloud. In the quiet corners of Zurich's student world, whispers begin to stir, but for now, they keep their secret close. The months that follow bring more than whispered warnings, more than quiet expectations. Mileva begins to feel it first, the change in her body, the swelling of something far more dangerous than reputation. She is pregnant. The word itself carries the weight of ruin. Unmarried, a woman in science, a foreigner, and now this. They keep it secret, at first. Albert tries to comfort her, but the walls are closing in. His family, already disgusted by her name, her limp, her presence, would never accept this shame. Zurich, once a sanctuary, becomes unbearable. And then, a second blow. Mileva receives word she has failed her final diploma examination, failing mathematics, the very subject in which she had once excelled. Some say the stress of the pregnancy, the isolation, the impossible pressure placed on her as a woman had taken its toll. With no diploma, no title, and now a child on the way, her future seems to collapse in a single breath. She packs her few belongings in silence. She boards a train alone, leaving Albert behind, and returns to Serbia, to her family's small home in Titel, the very place she once swore she had left behind forever. There, away from Albert, away from Zurich, she gives birth to a daughter. They name her Liesel. No official records remain. No birth certificate, no clear fate. Some say the child died in infancy. Others whisper that she was given away, lost to adoption, lost to time. What is certain is that Albert never sees her, and Mileva never speaks of her again. It is a loss they will carry, silently, for the rest of their lives. When Mileva finally returns to Zurich, the weight of it clings to her like a second skin. But Albert, he still waits for her. He takes her hands, promises they will begin again, that one day they will make everything right. And so, despite the shame, despite the silence, in 1903, they marry. There is no grand ceremony, no gathering of family or friends, just a simple civil service, 2 witnesses, and a quiet exchange of vows. No applause, no blessing. Only the 2 of them, choosing, once again, to stand alone, together. Married life begins in the smallest of rooms, barely furnished. Walls lined not with paintings or curtains, but with stacks of papers, open notebooks, and equations scribbled on scraps of newspaper. There is no wealth, no security, only the stubborn hope that somehow their minds will be enough to carry them through. Albert still cannot find steady work. Mileva becomes the one who keeps them afloat, tutoring the children of Zurich's wealthier families, while her own ambitions quietly slip further from reach. She had once dreamed of completing her doctorate, of standing on her own in the world of science. But now, the demands of survival leave little time for such dreams. Still, she does not complain. She sees what Albert cannot yet see for himself, the glimmer of something extraordinary in him, a mind capable of seeing the universe in ways others could not. And so, she gives all she has, her time, her energy, her quiet, steady belief. Their partnership deepens in these years, not just as husband and wife, but as collaborators. Their small kitchen table becomes their laboratory, their shared notebooks, their workshop. Mileva brings the discipline Albert lacks, the mathematical rigor that grounds his wildest ideas. While others dismiss his theories as childish nonsense, Mileva listens, challenges him, corrects. She runs calculations late into the night, pages filling with her precise handwriting. Many of Albert's lecture notes, saved to this day, bear the mark of her hand. In 1900, they complete their first scientific paper on capillarity, the mysterious force that pulls liquid into narrow spaces, but when it is published, only one name appears at the top: Albert Einstein. There is no room for a woman's name on a scientific paper, not in their world. Mileva knows this, and yet the sting of erasure lingers in her chest. Albert comforts her in letters, referring to it as their work. She tries to believe him, because she still believes in what they are building, not just a marriage, not just a family, but a future that might one day prove they were never just husband and wife. They were partners. Two minds, bound not by tradition, but by vision, serving something far greater than themselves, building a legacy, not of gold or fame, but of ideas. Ideas that might one day outlive them both, changing the way the world understands the universe itself. But as the months pass, one paper becomes two, then three, then four. The world begins to take notice, not of them, but of him. His letters to her still speak of our work, our ideas, our great victory yet to come. And Mileva, tired but loyal, holds on to those words like a lifeline. In 1905, that future begins to arrive. Albert publishes 4 papers that will change the course of modern science: the photoelectric effect, Brownian motion, the special theory of relativity, all born in the quiet hours at that small kitchen table, all bearing only one name. But Mileva knows, as she watches him rise, that behind every page, every calculation, every headline, there is a second mind, a second voice, one the world refuses to hear, and she wonders how long that silence can last before it consumes them both. The world begins to whisper his name, Einstein. The boy they once mocked as a dreamer, the student who challenged his professors, the rebel who dared to rewrite the laws of physics. Newspapers begin to print his theories, though few can understand them. Scientists gather in small circles, arguing over light and motion, time and space. And at the center of it all stands Albert, or so it seems. Mileva watches from the shadows as the world leans in closer, not to see them, but to crown him. The work they had once done side by side now bears his name alone. The recognition, the invitation, the praise, all belong to him. Albert still returns to her each night, filling their home with the same restless energy, the same racing thoughts. He still brings her scraps of paper to check, equations to verify, theories to challenge. He still needs her. But slowly, Mileva begins to feel the walls closing in again. Not from poverty this time, but from something deeper, something quieter, a growing diminishment. Each article printed, each lecture booked, widens the gap between the man the world sees and the woman the world does not. Her own dream, the ones she carried all the way from Serbia, begin to fade beneath the weight of motherhood, loneliness, and unspoken sacrifice. She has no title, no credit, no voice in the scientific circles that now call her husband a genius. And still, she stays. Not because she is blind to what is happening, but because she still believes in him. She believes in them, in the work that might one day change the world. But belief, no matter how fierce, cannot fill an empty heart forever. In the quiet hours, when Albert is lost in his own universe, Mileva feels herself beginning to disappear, and somewhere deep inside, she begins to wonder how much more of herself she is willing to lose. The invitations keep coming, from Berlin, from universities, from scientific societies eager to place Albert Einstein among their honored names. By 1914, Berlin becomes the inevitable next step, the city of emperors, of scholars, of power. Albert accepts without hesitation. He dreams aloud of lectures, connections, of his place among the great thinkers of Europe. But for Mileva, Berlin feels like a warning. She remembers how they began. Two equals, two outcasts, building a world of their own. But Berlin is not their world. Berlin is his. Reluctantly, she follows. Packing their two sons and the fragile remains of their marriage, leaving Zurich, the city that had once held all their hopes, behind. Berlin welcomes Albert with open arms. He stands on grand stages, his name whispered in halls of power, his theories declared brilliant, even prophetic. But in their new home, Mileva finds only silence. Strangers, cold and proper, women who glance past her without interest. And Albert, who once lingered at their small kitchen table, now disappears for hours, sometimes days, lost in the circles of influence she cannot enter. And there are rumors, women's names, late nights, quiet betrayals that Albert dismisses without explanation. The distance between them grows, not in miles, but in something heavier, something sharp enough to wound, until one morning, Albert places a sheet of paper on the table, a list, not of dreams, not of theories, but of conditions. Cold, humiliating conditions for their marriage to continue. You will expect no affection from me. You will leave my room without protest when I tell you to. You will speak to me only when I request it. Mileva stares at the words, and something inside her breaks. For years, she had stood beside him. For years, she had given her mind, her heart, her future. And now, this is all that remains. She gathers their sons, and without another word, she leaves Berlin behind. Not for the first time, but for the last. Zurich feels colder this time. The streets that once held promise now feel heavy with failure. Mileva returns not as a student, not as a rising mind, but as a woman left to start over with two young sons and a heart that feels like a hollow shell. Albert writes, at first, brief letters, polite, almost distant. He speaks of the boys, of practical matters, but never of love, never of regret. And Mileva answers only when she must, drawing tighter into herself with each passing month. The newspapers continue to praise him. The name Einstein grows larger, reaching across Europe, across the world. But in the small apartment on the quieter side of Zurich, the name means very little now. Mileva watches her sons grow. Hans Albert, bright and steady, and Eduard, delicate, with a mind as restless as his father's, but shadowed by something darker, something she cannot yet discern. The years pass quietly, until one day, in 1919, Albert sends word. He wants a divorce. There is someone else now, another woman, his first cousin, Elsa. Mileva does not fight. She does not beg. There is nothing left to save. They meet one final time, to sign the papers. Albert, already looking past her, already living another life. And Mileva, standing in the same quiet strength she carried the first day they met. He makes her a promise before she leaves. One final gesture: the Nobel Prize money. If he should ever win, it will be hers, for the sake of their sons, for all she has given. Mileva nods, not as a gift, not as forgiveness, but as payment for a debt that can never truly be repaid. And so, she turns away from him for the last time. The partner, the collaborator, the woman genius the world will never name. Mileva lives out the rest of her days in Zurich, not as a physicist, not as a scholar, but as a mother, and a memory the world is already beginning to forget. She never remarries, she never returns to the world of science. Her life becomes smaller, quieter, defined now by the care of her two sons and the steady weight of survival. Hans Albert grows into a promising young man, practical and kind. But Eduard, sweet, fragile Eduard, begins to slip into a darkness no calculation can explain. By his early 20s, the signs are undeniable. Mental illness takes hold, leaving Mileva to carry him alone. Through hospitals, through treatments that never seem to reach him, she watches the boy who once filled their home with laughter fade into a quiet, unreachable world. And all the while, far beyond Zurich's quiet streets, the world continues to whisper the name Einstein. Not hers, never hers. She sees his face on newspapers, hears his name on the lips of strangers, reads of the prize he has finally won, the Nobel Prize. True to his word, the money arrives. Enough to care for their sons, enough to ease the burden of survival, but not enough to rewrite the story the world has already chosen to tell. She takes the money, she pays the doctors, she keeps her family afloat, but Mileva never speaks his name again, at least not in the way she once did. Not with hope, not with pride. She lives until 1948, passing quietly. Just another woman in Zurich, carrying a story no one thought to ask her to tell. The years move on, and so does the world. Albert becomes something larger than life, a symbol of genius, a face recognized in every corner of the globe. He writes books, gives lectures, speaks of peace, of humanity, of the universe itself. But those who knew him in the earliest days, those who remember the young man with ink-stained fingers hunched over a kitchen table in Zurich, they grow fewer with every passing year. No one speaks of the woman who once sat across from him, the woman who filled the margins of his notebooks, who challenged his ideas, who carried his first child, who stood at his side when no one else believed in him. The world remembers Einstein, but the name Mileva Marić fades into near silence, mentioned only in passing, if at all. And yet, in the quiet corners of Zurich, her legacy lingers. In the creased pages of old lecture notes, in the faint traces of her handwriting beside his equations, in the life of the son she cared for until her final breath. History does not record her voice, but her presence, her influence, her quiet, steady mind, remain woven into the very fabric of the ideas that changed the world. The world never asked her to tell her side of the story. And Mileva, true to the quiet strength that had defined her life, never forced them to listen. She let the silence speak for her. In the years following their divorce, Albert's name only grows brighter in the public eye. He is hailed as the father of modern physics, the man who unlocked the very fabric of time and space. World leaders seek his counsel, universities offer him honorary titles, journalists gather eagerly to record his every word. But the work itself, the groundbreaking discoveries, the revolutionary papers that once poured from him during those quiet Zurich years, begin to slow. The brilliance that had once flowed so easily now feels distant, harder to grasp. He publishes, yes, he lectures endlessly, but the world waits in vain for another miracle year, another revelation to shake the foundations of science. It never comes. Historians note it quietly. The sharpest work of Einstein's life, the 4 landmark papers of 1905, his miracle year, all emerged during the years he was married to Mileva. After their separation, after she is gone, the great works stop. Albert continues to speak of peace, of humanity, of the dangers of war. He lends his name to causes, to movements, to ideas that reach beyond science. But in the world of physics, the silence grows heavier with every passing year. Some believe it was the natural course of genius, a fire that burned too bright too fast. Others wonder if something more had quietly disappeared when Mileva walked away. Those who remember her, the woman whose handwriting filled the margins of his earliest ideas, they wonder if the mind, the world so easily crowned as genius, had never truly worked alone. And in that wondering, her story stirs again, not as a footnote, but as a quiet truth still waiting to be fully told. They say history remembers the bold, the brilliant, the ones who dared to change the world. And it remembers him, Albert Einstein, the mind who redefined time and space, the genius who left his mark on the universe itself. But history is quiet when it comes to Mileva Marić, the woman who once sat in the same lecture halls, who walked the same streets, who built a life beside him, not as his shadow, but as his partner. She was a woman the world wasn't ready to recognize, a Serbian physicist in an empire that told her she did not belong, a mind sharper than most, erased. Not for lack of brilliance, but because she dared to stand as an equal in a world that never intended to make room for her. She never published under her own name. She never stood on the stage. She never held the title of professor or laureate or genius. But in the pages of Einstein's earliest work, in the margins of his theories, in the lost years of Zurich, her presence lingers still. Nearly all of Einstein's most revolutionary work was born during their marriage. And after their parting, nothing of equal brilliance ever followed. Some call it coincidence, some call it fate, but those who look closely, those who dare to read between the lines, know the truth may be far more complicated and far more human. Because the mind the world so quickly crowned as genius had never truly worked alone, and long after the headlines fade, long after the books are written, her legacy remains, not in titles, not in fame, but in the quiet, steady truth that the universe itself may still carry. The touch of two minds, bound not by name, but by the ideas they dared to dream together. And so, dear listener, as you drift now into rest, let the story of Mileva Marić stay with you. A reminder that history does not always remember the ones who stood quietly in the shadows, but we can. And behind every great man, is a greater woman. Mileva Marić. May the world never forget her name.